Hello Curious, and welcome back to another episode with the Wow Effect. In 1881, in the sands of the Egyptian desert in western Thebes, archaeologists found a tomb from 3,000 years ago, and inside, the members of the royal dynasty were buried, but one of the mummies stood out in particular from the rest. Her head was tilted back, her mouth was wide open, and her frozen face was full of terror and pain. Her legs were bent and bound at the ankles, while the other bodies found were arranged in an upright position. And they called her the Screaming Woman Mummy, and in the decades that followed, the mystery of her appearance could not be solved. It aroused the imagination of researchers until the present day, and because of its mystery, it has finally been solved after more than 100 years. So what is the truth about the Screaming Mummy? And what happened before her death that she was put to rest completely different from the others? And how did she die? And why did she look so terrified? Has her identity been discovered? So if you want to know the answers to these questions and more, hear our amazing story from ancient Egyptian times, so you better be sure to stick around until the very end. But before you continue, make sure you click on the subscription button, turn on the notifications, and don't forget to leave a thumbs up under this episode. Tombs discovered in Egypt have always been a fascinating subject for researchers, and the pyramids aroused the greatest curiosity, and many people to this day ask themselves the questions: how did they manage to build such colossal buildings? And there are theories about their extraterrestrial origin, as Elon Musk himself argued, stating in one of his posts on Twitter that it was obvious that the pyramids were created by aliens. It caused quite a stir on the web and in the world of scientists, but we may not be revealing more details about this case now, because if you want to hear more about it, you can do so by checking out one of our earlier episodes, to which the link is being displayed on your screen now. However, before you do that, you want to listen to another mysterious Egyptian story about a screaming mummy that aroused both curiosity and horror as early as 1881? Well, she was found in Thebes, and more precisely in the city of Luxor, located on the right bank of the Nile. Her burial place was in Deir Barhari Valley, and the remains of the dignitaries from the 21st and 22nd Egyptian dynasty were buried in a mass tomb. And before the mummy of a screaming woman was discovered, another body caught the investigators' attention, and it belonged to a man who was discovered to be the son of Pharaoh Ramses III. Prince Pentwater, as his name sounded, was forced to take his own life as punishment for participating in a conspiracy to get rid of the ruling ruler named Ramses III. And the murderous son was also posthumously stigmatized, and because his body was not embalmed, but only wrapped in sheepskin, which was a sign of impurity and condemnation to hell in the afterlife. There was an even more interesting case in the tomb called the Mummy of a Screaming Woman, and her body was wrapped in white linen and carefully mummified, but it did not look like the rest of the dead, and it had bent legs and it's turned to the right, and strangely with an open mouth. It was puzzling because all other mummies were placed in a grave in an upright position, and above all, during embalming, were taken care of to keep their mouths tightly closed. So many questions arose about it, and it was obvious that the dead cannot scream because muscles are involved in the process, and that requires a functioning brain, so it was concluded that the woman must have died screaming with her lips open, and that she had remained in that pose for eternity. But why was she screaming? Well, that the researchers who found her had failed to explain. However, efforts were made to discover at least its identity. On the linen scrolls in which she was wrapped in, inscriptions of the hieratic language which were discovered, and it appeared that she was the royal daughter of Meritamon. And this proved to be of little help given that many of their pharaohic princesses bore the same name, and therefore it was only assumed that she was a child of King Ramses II. This, however, could not be confirmed with 100% certainty, therefore the dead woman, although colloquially called the Screaming Mummy, was also known to archaeologists as Unknown Woman A. With time, it also became one of the most famous archaeological discoveries. Years after the discovery of the Screaming Mummy, Dr. Zahi Hawass, a well-known Egyptologist and professor of radiology at the University of Cairo, decided to deal with the case. And today, modern technology has opened up a much wider opportunity to study such an ancient find, and above all, to clarify the mystery that has tormented researchers for years. And using an X-ray scanner, Hawass was able to determine that the woman died in the 6th decade, and her life was carefully cared for by the mummificationists, and thus her internal organs were removed, except for the brain. Also, the salt from the Nile was rubbed into her skin, and then dehydrated her body was covered with oils and resins. According to the doctor, it was recorded in that state in which it was found, and with contracted legs and an open mouth, and this in turn was caused by an extensive heart attack which probably caused the woman to leave this world. An x-ray showed that she suffered from advanced atherosclerosis, so basically during her lifetime, and the disease that it affected among others the coronary arteries, carotid arteries, and abdominal aorta, or the arteries of the lower extremities. According to Dr. Hawas's theory, it was only found a few hours after her death when the muscles and joints became stiffened, also known as post-mortem contraction or rigor mortis. Thus, the embalmerists were unable to close the dead woman's mouth or place her body in its normal position. And as was the case with other deceased princesses, it is true that the rigor mortis disappears after 2 or 3 days, but the Egyptologists assume that for unknown reasons it was decided to quickly mummify the body to protect it from decay, and in this way the pose of the mysterious screaming woman was recorded for thousands of years, testifying the enormous suffering in the last moments of her life. The doctor and his research team had also planning further research on the mummy in order to finally establish its identity. It is worth mentioning that there are many other cases of screaming mummies all over the world. In the Mexican town of Guanajuato, there is a museum and has even been opened containing over 100 such remarkably preserved bodies, and one can see in alter alia the improbable case of a pregnant mummy or the youngest mummy in the world. It's also known why all of these left these worlds screaming with their lips open, and it was the responsibility for the cholera epidemic that hit Mexico decades ago. And one way to combat was to create massive graves to which those who were still alive were thrown into. Yeah, and as it was believed this would stop the spread of the plague. The sick left this world screaming in terror and in the poses that they naturally mummified, so today, however, we are discussing the case of a screaming mummy from Egypt, which has remained unexplained for years and is considered one of the most mysterious. But thanks to Dr. Hawas's research, it's finally possible to solve the mystery, and although we had to wait for over 100 years after its discovery. Now admit it, curious, do you like learning about such stories straight from ancient Egypt? Have you heard of the screaming mummies before? And would you dare to see the disturbing Mexican mummies from Guanajuato with your own eyes? Or maybe you would like a separate episode about this museum on our channel? Be sure to let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to leave a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel and turn on the notifications, and we'll be back tomorrow with another video. Until next time.